Hello, everyone. My name is Pepe Zan, and I'm Associate Director and Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center. And welcome to today's Experts of the Americas interview. And today, I'm just delighted to introduce our distinguished guest, Alejandro Mora, who is Partner and Head of Healthcare Global and Insurance for the Americas at NTT Data. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us today from Sao Paulo, I believe.
Yes, I'm located in Sao Paulo, just back from a couple of weeks of holidays. Thank you for the invitation and the possibility.
Pleasure to have you, and thank you for joining us in this busy summer too. Now, before we start, let me just say a few words on the context for this interview. The Adrian Arch Latin America Center, where I work, we really focus on Latin America and the Caribbean's strategic role in a global context, and always with a priority on the pressing economic and political issues that will define the trajectory of our region, not only now, but also in the years ahead. And at this moment, we're very much committed to helping the region to use the COVID-19 pandemic in the past couple of years as an inflection point for leapfrogging economic development. And as part of that process, we partner up with the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, to help better understand the opportunities and the challenges that the private sector sees in our region, and also the critical role that the private sector has played and can continue to play in supporting economic recovery and also long-term economic prosperity in our region. Now, today's interview is part of a conversation series with Latin American, Caribbean private sector leaders on these topics I just mentioned, and insights from today's interview and other interviews will provide input for an upcoming Atlantic Council IDB report. Today, specifically, once again, great to have Alejandro with us. We'll hear it from the NTT Data's perspective and a broader information technology space. Alejandro, once again, thank you. And with that, we'll kick off our interview today. And the first question I always have in this part of the series is why Latin America and the Caribbean, right? And once again, we're talking about NTT Data, which is a company, a multinational company with presence in many different parts of the world. One thing I've read earlier this year is that just in April this year, 3 months ago, NTT Data announced very ambitious plans that you guys will be developing metaverse projects across Latin America, starting with Brazil, where you are currently, and hoping to expand to Chile, to Peru, to Colombia. So given these commitments that NTT Data has to Latin America, and given these ambitious plans, I have to ask, what are some of the unique factors that make this region such an important market for you, especially when compared to some of the other regions?
Well, as you mentioned, our history in Latin America is quite long. So far, we have almost been here for 25 years now. We started our first projects in Chile around 1998. So we have a big history here. And again, as you mentioned, Latin America is a very important regional market for NTT Data as a whole. But I would say that the two main factors that make this market so important for us is, first of all, that we have 15,000 families behind us. We are NTT Data family in Latin America, is around 15,000 colleagues. We are growing quite fast. So our strong commitment to these people, NTT Data is our people and nothing else, is the main driver to keep growing, to keep doing business, to keep providing opportunities for everyone. That's the main driver, and we believe it firmly. And the second thing that I would highlight is that when you work in technology, you have the capability or the possibility to leapfrog. I mean, you don't have those barriers, whether physical or timely or financial, you can leapfrog. And after 10 years living in Latin America, I lived in Chile before moving to Sao Paulo, I and most of my colleagues have the goal, the purpose of helping Latin America leapfrog and accelerate its development through technology. I think that's a very, very important purpose. And I can assure you that's the main driver to be here, to grow here, to help our customers here.
Thank you for that. And this is certainly a sentiment that's echoed by a lot of our other interviews across different sectors, the potential that we see in the technological and digital space in Latin America and the Caribbean, and countries see it as a mission that they could be helping advancing. Now, on that point, I'd love to ask you about how NTT Data, and especially in the private sector in general, sees itself as an agent of positive changes for the region. You touched on this certainly, but perhaps going beyond a little bit of digital space, which I'm sure that will be a focus throughout our interview today. If I can ask you, what are one or two key socioeconomic challenges that you see the region is facing right now, and how your company has sought to help address these challenges? What would these be?
Well, that's a good one. That's a good one because it would take a long to answer that. But I would highlight two, I would say, different things, but for me are probably the most important. No? We speak a lot about the Latin American region, but from my point of view, we are quite far away from being a region in the sense of working as that and living and that and sharing as that. We have a couple dozens of countries that cooperate in a certain way, but are far from being integrated, let's say, from a European equivalent or something like that. For me, the first challenge would be integration, economic, politic, regulation, and the big thing about digital in this context is that digital doesn't know about boundaries. Digital can accelerate the process. So for me, integration, and I know that for the IDB, this is a key point in their policies, especially economic and logistics integration, is the first challenge that I would highlight. And the second one, and it doesn't mean that it's less important than the other, it's the fight we still have to develop against inequality. I mean, for me, inequality along with not enough integration is the great break or a stopper for the development of the region. And again, I think that digitalization in many areas, in many key areas like education, like healthcare, like transportation, like public safety, again, can be a key for that. So we need to think about people, to helping people that has who are more vulnerable or have the less possibility to develop their well-being, and we have to work really as a region and cooperate. I mean, just joining the potential of countries like Brazil, like Mexico, like Colombia, like Chile, under a common framework, at least in several areas, can, from my point of view, multiply the speed of the development of Latin America.
Both those points are very interesting, very important, I think, and both are points that here at the Atlantic Council and certainly with our colleagues at the Inter-American Development Bank, we're working very hard on inequality point, just the importance of inclusion, inclusive growth, inclusive recovery. That's on the top of our agenda. And certainly on integration, the IDB has spent a lot of time working on this issue, not only at the trade level, like you mentioned. This is really economic, political, and regulatory, some of the harmonization convergence that governments could be exploring at their level and could provide tremendous value for people, like you said, and also for businesses. So very much appreciate your both points on integration and equality. And I would say that, as part of this broader project, we also conducted a survey to private sector leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean. A lot of them did mention that integration is a key factor that they consider both as an opportunity and sometimes as a challenge for the region. So thank you for that, Alejandro. Now, my next question is more about thinking through ways that, private sector does not and should not be operating in a silo anymore. And certainly that's one of the biggest lessons learned from the pandemic. No single company or no single government could have dealt with the pandemic on its own. The partnership idea and the concept of it has just become not just important, but also necessary. So on that note, I'm putting IDB, for example, in the broader public sector basket, but I know that the IDB and NTT Data have partnered to promote open innovation and digital transformation in Latin America through a comprehensive guiding framework, which is very innovative. So tell us about that partnership and partnerships like that, why they're so important. And more generally, from a private sector perspective, how do you see the public sector and multilateral organizations help make Latin America more business and investment friendly for companies like yours?
Yes, I mean, that's something I think we learned several years ago. Even if when you are one of the biggest technology firms in the world, you can't work together. I mean, cooperation is absolutely key because technology is moving at such a pace that it's impossible for any company in the world to be leading everywhere. So that's absolutely key. As you mentioned, we have been cooperating with IDB for several years now in open innovation around the technology, which is our area, or I would say that digital, to speak about a broader term. And we are trying to move towards what I think is probably the sweet spot. And the role of IDB supporting governments on their transformations, I think that's one of the key drivers. We consider that although open innovation is seen as a key element, both from the private, big private companies, from the startups, or even from the academy, it has not been developed, or it is not being developing as fast as it should. And probably because it is difficult to articulate let's say the offer side. I mean, big companies, big techs, startups, university, but also it is difficult to articulate the demand because of the fragmentation of the demand from different sectors, different public areas, or even different countries with different realities, as we mentioned before. So I think that there's a possibility under that regional perspective, and in key areas, again, as education, healthcare, natural disaster response, public safety, with a key urban development for the future of the region, to try to set a virtuous circle that can change both offer and demand, and most importantly for me, to generate the capability of fixing to certain region or territory talent around digital, which is for us, for all our companies, and I would say for most of companies that are interested in technology, the great challenge today. Everyone has probably read a lot of reports saying that we will need, I don't know, the number of several hundreds of skilled people in technology in the future, and that's going to be a showstopper if we can't respond for that. So for me, just three pieces: demand aggregation, fostering cooperation between startups, big techs, and academy, and developing talent is the key. And IDB has already shown and will be very important on just articulating all those elements for the future of the region. And again, I think that this is not about any area. I have mentioned several of them that link very well to what we started talking today, you know, to that fight against inequality and pro-integration.
Thank you for that. And we've noted these 3 points, and I think, you know, it'd be very exciting to think through how the private sector in general could be working with governments and multilateral organizations across these 3 different areas and across different sectors, since, you know, this is such cross-cutting issues like you mentioned. We'll come back to the talents/skills point. I know that this is something that, you know, your firm has a lot to say. Perhaps save that as the last question in this interview. But before that, let me ask you a question on the business side of things. One thing that we also noticed during the pandemic is that, you know, business models and also customer needs, as you mentioned on the demand side, have very much evolved throughout the pandemic. In different sectors, this plays out differently. You know, we talk about digitalization, of course, a key topic for this interview. In some other sectors, we're talking about supply chain restructuring. In some of the other sectors, certainly sustainability, ESG, resilience. All of these could potentially have long-term implications. So from NTT Data's perspective, you want to highlight 1 or 2 some of these key changes and how your company is helping itself and also helping clients and partners to adapt to those. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yes, I mean, just as per the nature of our company, we're a consultancy and IT services company. So our main goal is to help our companies to adapt to all the things that you have mentioned. No? And I would say that digital or technology, it is not about technology, it's about people and how people face the transformations that are driven via technology. And I think that the pandemic has helped to fight against a lot of barriers that were essentially cultural, both at the individual level or at the corporate level. No? As you mentioned in the introduction, one of my main areas of work right now is healthcare. And healthcare is a paradigmatic example on how the pandemic, probably the only positive thing of this terrible situation, has helped the acceleration of digital transformation. And again, it is not about technology, because the technologies we have in 2022 were already there in 2020 and 2019. But it has been that as users of healthcare services and doctors and professionals of healthcare services finally say, oh, it is possible to deliver value on healthcare via digital tools. And it is not only that, it is that probably in certain areas, I mean, healthcare is mostly in volume about low complexity attendance. We can deliver even more value in the old ways. So the pandemic has helped to change that mindset and say, okay, that was possible. Why haven't we been waiting so long? So one key point is just changing that mindset. And one thing we do is just helping the companies and the corporations not only to change that mindset, but to adapt all the way they work, their processes, their strategies, to working in digital, which is not just working the same old way via digital companies. And the second thing is that pandemic, what generated was a permanent state of urgency. We had to adapt right now to the changes that were happening because everybody was going home. So many solutions have been adopted, but one thing is to adopt a solution in an isolated way to solve an urgent need, and another thing is to integrate that seamlessly in the way you work, in the way you transform. So you asked for me to highlight a couple of key factors, and I would say one of them is cultural change at every level. And the second one would be, okay, it is not only about adopting technology, it is about making technology or digital a key part of the way you work. And that probably means changing a lot of things in your processes and your strategies, in the way your relations with your customers, etc.
Thank you for that. And this is interesting, coming from a digital technology information company, saying that this is not really the challenge there is in technology itself. That's fascinating. And I absolutely agree with you. Sometimes a lot of it is really about how do we incentivize and educate, partners, clients, users to think more about that, to have this mentality shift. So that's fascinating. Thank you for that. Now, the last questions I mentioned earlier, I know that skills is just such an important topic for you, skills and talent. You mentioned that earlier as well. So I'd love to talk to you about that. We know that this is something that the region has been struggling with in some capacity. Others have said that this is a region with tremendous potential when it comes to digital skills. So tell us a little bit about how you see enhancing digital access and skills and being an important factor for Latin America and Caribbean's economic development and a priority for your company. When we talk about building or expanding digital infrastructure, whether that's hard infrastructure or soft ones like skills, how does that fit into your priorities in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Mm-hmm. I think that I'm not going to answer on behalf of Entity Data, but of all the companies that work in the digital arena. I'm sure my competitors and colleagues will agree fully with me. I wouldn't say talent is our first priority. Talent is our priority and only priority. Just to let you know, the IT sector is growing around 15% yearly, according to different scenarios in the Latin America region. And in our industry, I would say that attrition typically is around 20-25%. So if you just add up that, it means that just to fulfill your growth and get the people that you have lost through to attrition, you need around 40% new people working in your company. The pandemic has exacerbated both parameters, both growth and attrition. That means that probably around 70 to 80% of people that are working right now on IT companies weren't working for that same company 2 years ago. That's a tremendous challenge. So how can you maintain a culture, a way of working, a way of having a relationship with your customer when every 2 years, 70-80% of your people change? And that's only nominal change because everyone changes functions, roles, categories, etc. So talent from the point of view of keeping the culture, the way you work, is a tremendous challenge for all of us. No? And the second is, getting enough professionals and skilled people to keep that path. I mean, for the forecast we have from the main analysts, this 2-digit growth in the IT area will last in the mid to long long term. So we need a lot of skilled professionals, and universities won't provide us with them. So for us, it's key to diversify the source of our talent. I have been very self-critical with ourselves as a sector, because I mean we are crying about not having enough talent, but at the same time we weren't putting the needed attention on some areas like women. You know that women are underrepresented clearly on the IT area, or geographies just outside of the main cities. Fortunately, and again, that's a positive side effect of the pandemic. I think that has been changing. Everyone, because of telework, has realized that no presence in a big city like Sao Paulo or Santiago or Mexico is needed anymore. So we have been diversifying geographically. We have been including many more women in our companies. And another key factor for me is reskilling of professionals that are working on other sectors that might not see this kind of roles, or on the other way could just decline. No? So this is key for us, absolutely key, is the priority, but at the same time, I think it's probably the biggest opportunity for Latin America to combat those things we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, which is the best way to fight against inequality than generating skilled and well-paid jobs around all the geography. I think that if we join efforts, I mean, the IT companies, our customers and governments, and realize that with the possibilities of training and demand, and just focus on that, we have a key transformation driver for the region. I am fully convinced. And just to close, I just link it to what I said at the very beginning. No, this is the commitment for our people, for our families, and it is not just working, it's just welfare for everyone.
No, thank you, Alejandro. I can't think of a better way to kind of close out this conversation. And I was going to make the same point, tying it to your initial comments at the top. I think digitization just has so much potential for it, specifically the 2 points and 2 challenges you mentioned, whether that's inequality or integration. A lot of things could be happening there. And second thing is tying to another question we talked about earlier, which is the importance of partnerships, right? Partnerships within the industry, and you mentioned that as well, you know, the sector working together, as well as, you know, partnership with governments, partnership with the community. I think that's absolutely important. And, you know, especially on the skills point, I see, for example, organizations like the IDB and regional governments playing a critical role to be supporting some of these digital skills education agenda for us to take our talent to the next level, to respond to that demand that you mentioned, the very shocking statistics there. It's very exciting. And I think finally, just on the inequality point, finally, I just think that this is a challenge that we face as a region, and really depends on how digitization may or may not plan out. This could have either a mitigating effect on the inequality that we see in the region, or it could be having the opposite effect. We have to crack policy and support private sector growth in a way that really supports some of these efforts, and I really see this as a huge potential for the region, medium long term, like you said. And with that, we'll close. And Alejandro, once again, thank you so much again for doing this interview. It was great to share this space with you and hear your insights. And thank you for joining this Experts of Americas interview. Everyone, thank you for listening in. We're very happy to have had Alejandro with us today, partner and head of Healthcare Global and Insurance Americas at NTT Data.
Once again, thank you. And it's been a pleasure to discuss on those very, very relevant topics.